All right, let's dive into this explainer. Today we're looking at a pretty wild counterintuitive idea, why relying on perfectly smooth AI-generated content might actually be killing your readership. I mean, we are living in this crazy time where creating content has literally never been easier, faster, or frankly more technically flawless, right? But there is a massive hidden trap that so many creators are falling headfirst into right now. The sources we're unpacking today reveal a fascinating truth about what happens when you automate your writing to the point of absolute perfection. You might think, hey, I'm removing myself as the bottleneck. But what you're actually doing is removing the exact reason people read your work in the first place.
Picture this scenario. $12.43. That pitiful little amount was the total payout for 7 whole days of flawless, highly optimized AI-generated content. A creator ran this 90-day experiment, right? They built a whole AI content machine, custom instructions, multi-step chains, the whole shebang. They were pumping out 5 times their normal volume with maybe 10% of the actual effort. A full week of work, 7 posts, 12,000 words, 0 typos, completely SEO optimized. And the result? Just complete irrelevance. They're sitting there at their desk, tea going cold, laptop fan just whirring away, and they realized they had built something extremely efficient, but completely dead.
So what actually went wrong? Well, this vividly illustrates the core issue. While that content machine pumped out 5 times the volume, the audience would click the headline, immediately smell something synthetic, and just bail. The read ratio plummeted from a really healthy 45% all the way down to a dismal 12%. And honestly, here is the terrifying part of this whole thing. The headline still worked. People were definitely clicking. But the very second they hit that first flawlessly constructed paragraph, their brains triggered this subtle little alarm. They sensed the synthetic nature of the text. They didn't bounce because they were too busy, they bounced because something just smelled off. In a feed where every single post is now technically correct, being correct is suddenly worth absolutely nothing.
Which brings us to part 1, the Polish trap, and why perfect is the new boring.
You know, we've all been so deeply conditioned to believe that good writing absolutely has to be clean writing. We chase these ultra-smooth transitions, impeccable logic, 0 grammatical friction. But here's the reality check. If you try to compete on being clean, you are entering a race against a machine that works for free, never needs sleep, and can spit out 1,000 immaculate answers in 3 seconds. Readers just don't show up for frictionless information they can get from an LLM anyway. They come for the specific, slightly humiliating texture of a human being who has actually tried. The sources define this brilliantly. They call it polished rot. It's what happens when you buff a piece of writing so much to make it sound professional that you accidentally sand off all the friction. You lose that wrong turn you took for 2 years, or the embarrassing story of the client who fired you over something stupid. AI writes from a mountaintop it never actually had to climb, you know? It gives you the view from nowhere. And that smooth, frictionless perfection rots faster than anything else in a feed already drowning in synthetic junk.
Let's move into part 2, the scar tissue framework. This is all about writing the scar, not the summary. So, how do we actually fix this? How do we inject our humanity back into our work? The answer lies in what our source calls the scar tissue framework. Look, real expertise is mostly just scar tissue, and a language model simply doesn't have any. If you want to survive and thrive out there, you have to shift your framing. Humans will blindly skim a generic lecture like 5 ways to improve productivity, but man, they will always follow a confession. Think about it. If you write How to Beat Writer's Block, you're writing a commodity. It's a brochure. It's one prompt away from existing on 1,000 other blogs. But if you shift that to, here's the morning I deleted 4,000 words at 6 a.m. because I realized I wrote them to sound like someone else, suddenly you aren't lecturing anymore. You are confessing. And that is incredibly powerful. One is just a list of facts. The other is a real person.
And this brings us to the ultimate AI killer, the mouth test. This is where you must read your draft out loud and ruthlessly delete any corporate-sounding sentence you wouldn't naturally say to a friend at a pub. Seriously, this is such a fantastic practical tool. AI produces what we call standard written English, right? But humans actually connect through speech-patterned English. You need to take your draft, stand up, and literally read it out loud. Not just in your head, out loud. Every single sentence that your mouth physically refuses to say naturally. You know the ones that sound like a stuffy press release or tell the reader to delve into the shifting landscape, you have to cut them. If it doesn't pass the pub test, it does not get published. And speaking of cutting things, you have to kill those throat-clearing preambles. Readers don't want the warm-up stretch. They want to start right at the cold tea and the moment of crisis. AI absolutely loves a preamble. It loves to start with, in today's fast-paced digital world, it is increasingly important to, no, stop, delete it. That is just you clearing your throat and easing into the pool. The reader doesn't have time for the warm-up. They want the drop mug. They want you to start exactly at the $12.43 payout. You've got to start right where the story actually begins to bleed.
Now, instead of writing perfectly even paragraphs that end up looking like beautiful machine-built gray bricks, you need to intentionally leave the seams showing. It signals the broken rhythm of a human deciding what matters in real time. Think about how you read online today. You don't read top to bottom anymore, do you? You skim. You scroll until something snags your attention. AI writes in identical, perfectly even paragraphs without any handholds. So break your formatting. Give me a short, punchy line. Then give me a really long one that kind of wanders and maybe even contradicts itself a bit. Because hey, that's how actual thinking works. Use a fragment. It's not just some cheap formatting trick. It's a profound signal to your reader. A machine spaces everything evenly because the words cost it absolutely nothing. You space things unevenly because some of those words actually cost you something.
Here's a golden rule. Every single section needs one unfakeable detail that proves a person was actually there. If a stranger could have written your sentence, it simply isn't yours yet. This is absolutely critical to take away. Consider the difference here. I worked in a busy office. Okay, that could be generated by literally any algorithm on Earth. But I worked in an office that smelled like burnt popcorn and stale Xerox toner. Now that is proof of life. It's a specific Tuesday, it's a real brand, a real smell, a real human memory. Just following that one rule alone will do more for your read ratio than tweaking 100 SEO headlines.
All right, part 3, architecture versus art, and the 80-20 split. Look, quitting AI completely right now would be like a carpenter throwing away their brand new power saw just because they want to build a handmade table. The power saw isn't the problem. The problem is letting the saw design the house. This 80-20 split shows you exactly how to divide the labor. Let the machine handle the architecture. Happily hand over the grunt work, things like clustering your SEO keywords, turning a rambling 10-minute voice note into a bulleted skeleton, or summarizing dense research papers, but you must guard the art with your life. The specific angle, the rhythm and cadence of how your sentences actually land, your personal scars. Never ever let the tool decide what matters. The mistake was never using the tool in the first place. The mistake was letting the tool dictate the actual soul of the work.
Which leads us to part 4, chasing the finish, the metric that saves your business.
So now that we've built this framework, let's look at the numbers that prove it actually works. The author of our source explains that the final step in their whole recovery from this AI content trap was changing what they actually measured. They just stopped looking at views entirely. A view tells you almost nothing of value. It's literally just a stranger passing by. But a finish? If a reader gets all the way to the bottom of your piece, they trust you. And if they trust you, they subscribe and they buy. Treating any read ratio under 30% as an absolute code red is a phenomenal rule of thumb. If you drop below that threshold, it means your reader felt a hollow gap, switched off their brain, and just left. And every single time they bounce, you are teaching the algorithm that your work disappoints.
To protect that crucial finish ratio, always write your headline after the piece is finished. That way you aren't writing a check your body text can't cash. This is a tiny move, but it has a massive effect. When you write the headline first, you are making a promise based on what you hope to deliver. And that leads directly to the click gap, where you promise them a juicy burger, but you end up delivering a side salad. By waiting until the very end, you name exactly what you actually created. You protect the read ratio, and in turn, the feed protects you.
So right before you hit publish, run your piece through this quick 3-part humanity audit. It'll catch 80% of that synthetic feeling and ensure you aren't sounding like some generic LinkedIn thought leader. It literally fits on a Post-it note and takes maybe 10 minutes. First, ruthlessly hunt down AI-isms, words like delve, unleash, transformative, or landscape. Just kill them. Second, add a because. Don't just hand out a tip. Tell us why you learned it the hard way. Give us the context. And third, leave in one ugly sentence, a sentence that feels maybe a little unprofessional, a little jagged, but is deeply, undeniably true to your specific experience.
Coming full circle back to where we started, that abysmal $12.43 payout was honestly a pretty cheap price for the ultimate lesson. You simply cannot prompt your way into being worth reading. We're back at the exact same desk, staring at the exact same dashboard, but by applying these frameworks, by intentionally leaving the seam showing and writing the scar instead of the summary, there is finally someone on the other side of the screen again. A real reader, finishing a real thing. I want to leave you with a direct challenge. Audit your own work right now. Find your worst polish rot and start injecting your human scar tissue back into your writing. Go look at the very last thing you published.
Scan it closely. Find that one sentence that is entirely too smooth, the one that a machine could easily have generated in its sleep. Identify it, rip it out, and replace it with something only you could possibly say. Because in a world of infinite, free, perfect answers, your friction is the only thing we actually want to read. So ask yourself right now, what is the flattest, most could be any one sentence in your last piece of work?